Welcome to the third episode of A More Delightful Future, where you'll hear conversations about how to design a better society. I'm your host, Elijah Claude, and today you'll hear from Dr. Diem Mooney, the Chief Experience Officer at his consultancy agency, Carpe Noctem, where they do career coaching, UX design strategy, and business solutions consulting. Dr. Diem is known as a savant and has used his abilities to attain 5 degrees, including a doctorate of psychology. He also has experience in change management and business analysis with the U.S. Navy. Diem dedicates himself to the task of helping solve complex problems people have with their career or organization. Buckle up and pay attention because Dr. Diem drops a lot of information in a small amount of time. So the first question is, what does it mean for design to be delightful?
Delightful. It's very subjective. It's a very subjective way of describing design. Delightful, I would say, in my opinion, would need to be intuitive. Something that's very easy for the user to engage with and understand. The fact with delight, it seems like it's light. It's very kind of easy. Another thing I would say would be associated with color. A lot of more UI, making sure that's pleasant to look at. So the layout of the information, layout of imagery, is something that people perceive to be pleasant.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great way of defining it as well. So the question number two, flying through these, is how do you design inclusive experiences?
Sure. So I would say with anything, whenever you're trying to do a change initiative or design something that's inclusive, you would need to understand all of your different demographics and populations. So that involves research and analysis of said demographics. A lot of those groups are marginalized and underrepresented, meaning that if you were to assume that you already have the information on them, likely you don't, because they haven't been asked. you know so in order to do so, in order to design anything inclusive, you need to first make sure that you identify all of these marginalized, underrepresented groups that would be interacting with the design, taking the time to then ask them for their experience and their perspective, and then map out, like user flows, personas, whatever, so you can truly understand their pain points and their challenges, their recommendations, as they are usually very unique, especially when you consider accessibility.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And to kind of follow up with that, I find that a lot of companies, they might say they, are looking at inclusiveness and accessibility, but they don't seem to have, those personas that really cater to those pain points. So why do
Yeah.
you think, these a lot of products and companies don't go further into there? What are they missing?
Well, I guess the one reason why they wouldn't is because they don't know that the particular demographic exists. They don't know necessarily all of the user groups or the breakdowns of some of these individuals because, as underrepresented implies, there aren't like a large population sometimes, or looking at it from a like a data standpoint or the quantitative standpoint is maybe this group doesn't really bring in much revenue. Like if you have a product and only a small percentage are associated with disability, then they're like, well, they only take up a small percentage of sales in the first place, so let's just bypass them. So it can come down to bottom lines and ROI. It can come down to simply ignorance, not knowing that there's a particular demographic that have challenges associated with their product and design, going with accessibility. And another one could simply be not seeing the significance of making an inclusive product in the first place. Simply saying, not everyone can use it, that's fine. Well, the people who can use it, that's who it's for. People, a lot of times, product owners, product managers, business owners can just simply shrug off the idea that their product is not inclusive and simply say, well, it's only for the people who can use it then. That attitude is actually more prevalent than people think.
Yeah, that's huge. That's definitely huge. And I have to, keep doing a follow-up question, but
Sure.
how do you think they might be able to find, these groups that are underrepresented that they don't even know exist?
Sure. So that usually kind of happens during discovery phase of so during your discovery phase or your sprint zero, depending if you're in an agile environment, that's when you go out and you just do really qualitative, holistic research where, or it's not necessarily qualitative because you do quantitative, you do a study, with a large group of people and just ask really pretty open-ended, you know, questions, just take pushing your assumptions to the side for a second and just saying, how do you engage with this product? What do you think about this product? What are challenges you face? Because even by asking about challenges they face, it can kind of pull out some of that accessibility, inclusivity issues. If someone's like, well, a challenge I'm facing is this website is great, but I'm colorblind, and the differentiation between these buttons are hard for me. Well, you may not have been trying to find accessibility issues, but you found one by simply opening up the questions. So that way you can kind of gather, a lot of different types of responses. So I would say it's important to do a product discovery period, in order to identify these types of challenges. You're able to also start to understand your if it's a B2C, your consumer base a lot better. You understand the population and their challenges. Even if it's B2B, if you're talking internal systems like your employees, it helps you to better understand some of the challenges they're facing in your processes and your services, um, and then be able to tailor your product or your service around their needs. So product discovery, I would say, the best way of going about it.
Awesome, awesome. I love that. Especially the part about having open-ended questions, because I think
Yeah,
when a lot of people do research, they, have very assumptive, targeted questions.
of course. Yep.
So opening up makes a lot of sense. All right. So the next question, how do you think the role of UX is viewed in tech companies, and why is that their perception?
Hmm. Well, I would say it depends on my company. I mean, I've worked with a lot of different companies. I would say there's usually two different types of companies, and then that impacts their perception. One type of company has a very new UX team, meaning that they've heard buzzwords. They know UX exists, but they don't truly know what it is. So their perspective of UX is usually formulated off of social media, or like you quickly Google what it is, and a lot of times it's really boxed in. It's really heavy on development and engineering. They're like, okay, well, you do back end coding, no Python, and all that. And they'll think that's what it is, or they'll think the opposite, and they think it's only visual design, where you're all graphic designers and that's all we do. So there are tech companies who are aware UX exists, but are very ignorant to what it is actually is. And then there's the companies where they are a little bit more seasoned in UX, meaning they have a UX team that's been developed, and they exist. And that perception, it is solely based off of the value add that they feel like their UX team has provided. So if they've been doing this for a while and they have UX team and it's a pretty mature team, they feel like, oh, well, they've consistently been providing value of whatever they deem valuable is. They usually have a pretty positive perspective, like, well, yeah, they do their job, they're a cog in the machine, and they kind of push a role. Versus one who has a UX team that maybe not developed as well, or has a lot of challenges, where they see UX as unnecessary step. They're like, no, we have UX team, and they just kind of prolong the process. They halt development. It takes long to get into prod, things like that. So their perception of it is based off of their very specific UX team versus UX as a whole. So those are kind of the perceptions: either complete ignorance on what UX is, or a very siloed perspective based off of their one interaction with the UX team. Neither, of course, capture the full gravity of what UX is and what it can do. But that's what you basically have to work with companies.
Right, right. That's huge. And related to that, which is leads us to the fourth question is, what can we do better as UX professionals and teammates, especially at agile tech companies, to
Mhm.
really inspire this better view of UX?
I would say to standardize wherever possible. From my experience, maybe somewhat biased considering I'm a strategist and that's what I do. Um, I've found that teams that are UX teams that don't have standard processes, they don't have consistent deliverables and delivery times and artifacts. They're usually perceived as less than, roadblocks, confusing on what they do. So it can improve the perception of UX by making it a little bit more standardized and more formalized. The words should mean the same thing if one designer says it or another one. If they are looking at a prototype, a company would like for it to be somewhat similar to the prototype they just saw, not saying in the design itself, but like maybe in the tools being used, maybe in the flow. What a prototype is shouldn't be significantly different than what a prototype is to someone else. So because right now UX can come off as it's just like a free for all, it's not as respected. It's not seen as a science because, as you know, science is repeatable. So science means that you can use a consistent methodology and yield similar results over and over again. That's what makes it scientific. And see, as a psychologist, I know that because for psychology, it is. We know we have our frameworks, we have our models. They've been validated, they've been published, critiqued by other psychologists. But with UX, it's a little bit more up in the air, but by standardizing your practice internally, if you're an internal team, or even if you're external contractor, standardizing your process, showing that's repeatable, showing that it's measurable, showing that that creates reliability and validity, and that will definitely change the perception of your deliverable.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's awesome. And as for me, that's getting into UX design. And I've seen this from the outside, sort of as business strategy and just operations in general. Being able to have that results oriented, aspect really
Yep,
is really important. So I do
of
I
course.
do respect that. All right. Next question here is, how do you design for emergent technology?
How do I design for emerging technology? Hmm. I mean, I would say the process first. I will say I'm not a designer. Well, I do service design, meaning process improvement and process development, but interface design I do not do. So I'm going to make sure that I'm answering this from the right perspective here. But as far as designing for emerging, let me think. I suppose it would be the same though from even doing process improvement for something that already exists. How you look at it is the same. I feel like I use a pretty specific framework for either one. I'm trying to think if there's any differences because I've never been asked that before. I guess one is more direction of improvement. So you take a design that exists and you work on identifying pain points so that you can better improve it versus developing something that has not been created just yet, where it's more heuristic evaluation. So, making pretty broad assumptions and saying, based off of my knowledge of this particular user group, based off my knowledge of the challenges that they face, I think this would work. So I guess one is um, more going through and saying, okay, this is already exists. These are challenges we already know for sure. Let's take these and kind of tweak functionality, and a little bit of features here and there. While other one is more of like larger scale, like road mapping what the product or service should look like, meaning that you have to make a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of guesswork there, and you have to kind of take your ego and just say, nope, I can be wrong about all of this. It's a lot more creative. You have to really be innovative in those sense where you're like, okay, what do I think right now with nothing to look at, blank slate? What do I think I can create right now to solve a problem? I think it's
Right.
probably the attitude you have to have and how you go about the project itself that differs, but your process should still be the same for both.
Okay, awesome, awesome. I haven't really looked at it like that myself, but yeah, I think that is a good way to look at it because, like you said, it's still the same sorts of processes and tool
Yeah.
sets that you're using, but you're just applying it to different use
Yeah.
cases and
One's an
having to
improvement,
consider
one's a
assumptions.
development. Yeah.
Right, right. Awesome. Okay. All right. Almost done here already. All right. So the sixth question is, what are you looking for when hiring UX professionals, especially in the entry level?
Sure. So honestly, I don't really care too much if the person is entry level, mid level, senior. It doesn't really make a difference because how I assess has nothing to do with what you already know. How I assess is what you're willing to learn. So it's a different direction here. So basically, when I'm evaluating someone or talking with someone, I'm really interested to know how much they like to grow, how much information they take in, how much they go above and beyond on their own to continue to hone in and develop their own skill set. It's because I feel like those are the people that work best, first of all, as consultants, because essentially when you're working with me, you have to be your own entity. Like you work with a team, of course, you have support, but at the end of the day, when it's time to problem solve, you have to be able to come up, with these innovative solutions. We do a lot of development. We go into companies with very interesting challenges sometimes, and I don't know all the answers to everything. It's impossible for one person to know that, but I know what I do in order to stay up to date with everything, but to stay, to stay growing and developing in my field is by, always trying to learn, always trying to grow, expose myself to new ideas. And I would like the people around me to do the same. So never, I don't call myself like a senior researcher. It doesn't, what difference does it make if I am or not? What matters is that I am a researcher in that aspect. I'm a Marine had a researcher who can continue to learn about the newest methodologies that are appropriate, the newest tools that can be used to assess, remotely, whatever. And the people around me, I look for to be the same.
Right, right. Awesome. So yeah, that's what really got me super interested about, talking to you as well, is just that mentality. And but I do have to ask though, because that does sound like a very sensible way of looking at it, but why don't, more companies, more people have this outlook when they're hiring people?
Because it requires a high level of involvement first for managers and for leadership to be willing to teach. If I'm looking for someone who is willing to learn, that implies that I am willing to teach, right? Because that's just the way it goes. And that's not necessarily the case with some companies, some teams where they want you to come in knowing everything, because their angle is not necessarily to teach and grow the individual to be a better asset. It is that they come in being the biggest asset so that they can take from them whatever they need. Now, again, it's not bad. It's transactional. These things. I'm going to pay you to give it to me. But I've just found that in my way of thinking, what I promote for my company, that doesn't really work out too well. Where that means that essentially that person is gaining nothing. From like an education standpoint, if they are able to do X, Y, and Z, right, and I hire them to do X, Y, and Z, that's not the full alphabet. There is still A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? They're only doing X, Y, and Z. I'm paying them X, Y, and Z. They leave that situation only still knowing X, Y, and Z. What I prefer, again, the idea of like outgrowing your box, is that there are more letters in the alphabet, that yes, you are good at X, Y, and Z. That's great. Come to me and let's apply X, Y, and Z. But did you know, about M, N, L? Let's learn about those, because then you can combine them. And next thing you know, you're spelling words and you're mixing matching this, and then you know what I'm saying? So again, it does imply though that I am then willing to expose them to things that they don't really know. And then again, for a company, that could be a lot of time, a lot of dollars for training. Not all managers, not all leadership are also coaches, and I am a coach. So I would say it's probably why, the time and effort that goes into it. Doesn't mean that every leadership even has the qualifications or the aptitude to do it. But because I find it's been really, really good for my company to utilize I'm literally a psychologist. So using that to help my team grow, I think it's been a really good asset for me.
Awesome, awesome. I love that so much. Thank you for that answer.
Sure.
All right. So the last question here is, how do you invent magic? And you can take that however you want.
How do I invent magic? Interesting question. Uh, Magic, something. Let me think. It's a very tough question, because you have to define what magic is first. And what is magic? Suppose it be something, an occurrence or phenomenon that can't be easily explained. So if I define it that way, I would say I do that probably all the time with my goals. I establish very high goals for myself, that most would not think are doable or manageable or could be attained. And in that sense, how I respond to it is by creating an action plan. My milestones and my feats, I don't go off of if everybody else believes that they are doable or reasonable. I simply take my own abilities and then say, okay, this is what I have. This is my X, Y, Z. Now, what am I missing in the alphabet for me to actually be able to execute? And then I take everything I have into learning about those. So if I need to know, again, like A, B, C, D, E, well, then I'm going to put all of my resources into learning all about A, B, C, and D, utilizing my X, Y, and Z that I already have, and then taking that. And again, it results in something that people are like, how on earth did you do that? I have no clue how that came about, like that whole thing, which I get all the time. So I would say defining magic that way, that's how I do it. I just create an action plan, do a gap analysis to understand what part I'm missing, and there you go.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like the practical standpoint of that, looking at it from a like a career standpoint and life standpoint. I love that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is it. Very short and sweet, very
All right.
impactful. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Hmm. I mean, I think you asked some really good questions I've never been asked before. So, no, I think that you kind of covered everything.
That was Dr. Diem Mooney from Carpe Noctem. You can check out their services at carpenoctemcoaching.com or reach out and connect with him on LinkedIn. Dr. Diem is building a more delightful future. Are you?